Hi, my name is Todd Cochrane. I'm the founder of Blubrry Podcasting. I'm this week's guest on MetaPod.
This is MetaPod Podcast Pioneers, where we unpack the early days of podcasting by talking to the pioneers that defined them. Hosted by Kevin May and Wendy Morrill.
Hi, I'm Kevin May.
And I'm Wendy Morrill, and this is MetaPod.
For those of you that don't know, normally we unpack the web's most interesting podcasts and the stories behind them.
We do, but today isn't your typical episode. Usually we have an in-depth interview with the host and creator of your favorite podcasts, or a podcast that you haven't discovered yet, but might be interested in.
So, this week though, we're doing something different. We're excited to tell you in what will hopefully be an ongoing series of extra special episodes of MetaPod.
That's right. We'll be talking to pioneers of the podcasting world about the early days and rebels of the medium, and how podcasts have evolved into a popular way to disseminate and consume news, information, and entertainment.
So, kicking us off is none other than Todd Cochrane, now known as the founder and CEO of Blubrry Podcasting, a podcasting hosting company also known as Raw Voice Inc.
But Todd is, as our new series is known, one of the pioneers of podcasting, having started his first show back in 2004, Geek News Central.
Todd is still at it, plus many other things in podcasting, but has been there from the very beginning and has plenty to say about the origins of the podcasting world we're all in nowadays and how it's evolved over time.
Strong views and interesting memories of those early days for sure, and we got him to tell us all about it. So, in our first special episode of Podcast Pioneers, here's Todd Cochrane. Start the tape. Mr. May, start the tape. Hi, Todd. Welcome to MetaPod. We're really happy you could join us today.
Well, I'm glad to be here and look forward to talking with you folks.
So one of the reasons we wanted you to come to the show for this special episode of MetaPod is to have you talk a little bit about the early history of podcasting. And I'm guessing there might be a few different versions of the history of podcasting, but today we're asking for your version. Would you lead us through some of those early years by way of your own story about how you came into podcasting, and maybe mention what your claims to fame are in the podcasting world?
Yeah, sure. So, the journey, how life has these right and left hand turns. And I had a right hand turn in June of 2004. I got hurt pretty bad. I was an active duty military, non-combat related injury in a swimming pool of all places. Laid me up for I was in the hospital for 13 days and happened in Bahrain. And I came back to the United States and was on recovery. When you're broke in the Navy, they don't really like that. They want you to be working. So I was looking for something to do. And they said, hey, we got this contract enforcement thing in Waco, Texas. You want to go to Waco? And I said, yep, let's go. Out of sight, out of mind, right? So I got to Texas. I was working basically, in 100-degree weather, wearing a clamshell because I had a broken back. And every night I was spending time in my hotel room. And I started just surfing the internet one day, and I was familiar with Dave Weiner and some stuff he'd done. And basically, I run across a daily source code with Adam Curry and Dave Weiner talking about this thing called podcasting. And boy, it sucked me right in. So this was October 1st, 2nd of 2004. I very hastily ran across the street to a Walmart, picked up a $14.95 LabTech microphone, the absolute worst microphone you could have, and recorded my first show. And in those days there was no Libsyn, there was no Blubrry, there was nothing. There wasn't even hardly any support for the RSS enclosure tag that really powers podcasting today. And a lot of us, we were, the first couple of those, I think I coded the RSS feed by hand. But what was amazing to me in those early days was that I was a horrible blogger. I maybe had 300 people come to my site every week. The analytics was pretty sad. But the podcast took off like a rocket ship. And in those days, we thought in a rudimentary measure, I thought within like 6 months, I had like 50,000 subscribers, probably in the scheme of things after the modern math, modern filtering is probably more like 10,000, not 10, but 10,000. And, it was a struggle just to keep the show online because I was running out of bandwidth. About every 3 days, I'd be on a hosting account and I would burn through the allotted bandwidth that hosting account allowed for. So I was buying multiple hosting accounts. And I think I got up to 9 or 10, and I would move the show episodes every 3 days. So actually, when I was doing show production, I was uploading into 10 different locations just so I could keep those shows online in the out months. But the industry was exciting. It was the early. It was basically pioneer days. We were making stuff up as we go. We really didn't know what we were doing, but things progressed very, very quickly. In early December of 2004, and I had already gone back to Hawaii and explained to my wife, what I was doing, and she kind of looked at me and said, "You got 2 years to figure out how to make money with this thing," because I'd had some hobbies before that were, pits of money, and so anyway, what really transpired then was in December, I was approached by Wiley Publishing to write the first book on podcasting. And having not had a lot of success as a blogger, I said, you really want me to be the one to write this book? I'm maybe not the best candidate. And ultimately, I did. I signed a contract and I started working in January of '05, started working on the first book of podcasting. And then ultimately was released in June. And there's some stories that go along with that. But I think what we saw in the early days was it was largely techies that could figure this thing out from a technical standpoint. A little later on, Libsyn came on the scene and really kind of cleaned up. They were the first hosting provider coming with a model that was unheard of, unlimited bandwidth. You just pay a certain amount of money every month. And it ultimately, what it did for me was gave me some opportunities that led to what I do today. But I think here's a little story about how the space has changed. So I got this book deal. They gave me like $13,000 advance. I never really announced how much money I got for the advance on the book. That doesn't even happen anymore on first time authors. But I announced the book deal on episode 69 of my show. And I immediately lost half my audience because I had sold out and took money. It was not for the art. It was for, you're supposed to be doing this because you love creating content, not for making money. I had told my audience from the beginning, had to be a gateway to figure this out to make cash down the road. So the half that left were with me when I signed the GoDaddy deal in June of '05. And that really kind of set wheels in motion for ultimately them coming back to me and saying, "Do you know other podcasters that want to start advertise with us?" I had already started one of the first networks called Tech Podcast back in January of '05. And I said, yes. And I said, there's a business idea there. And that's how Blubrry Podcasting was born. Was I told my audience, I need a lawyer, I need a biz dev, I need a graphics guy, I need a programmer. We're having a call in 9 days if you're one of those people. And I met my team, my current board of directors minus one, on a phone call from the audience of my show and formed Raw Voice, which everybody knows is Blubrry Podcasting today. But it's kind of this crazy evolution of things. There was some money being thrown at the space. Adam Curry and his company got some money, like $26 million. That lasted a couple of years. They burned through that. A lot of my competitors in the early days, which really, we weren't in the hosting business, we were in the advertising business. If we'd have been smart, could have held on, we would have probably been a much bigger company than we are today if we would have just stuck with the advertising piece. But I think that, we may not have survived because times changed as the medium grew, but we did survive, and the company is what it is today. But I think going back to those early days, it was really one of these spirits of, well, if you think back, for those of you that are listening to this to, if you were of an age in 2004 or 2005 where maybe you were getting your first cell phone, there was not an iPhone. It was just a phone, flip phone, and consuming media on it was, you couldn't. I've got a reminder up here behind me. It's an iRiver. It's a little 256 meg MP3 player. And
Oh, wow. I remember those. Yeah.
And we were syncing podcasts. I think I could get 12 episodes on this thing. And I was syncing it every night with new content because the iPod was out of financial reach for me at the time, which was on the market. But ultimately, until the iPhone came on the scene, really things, and Apple introduced podcasting to the iPhone. Things, those were inflection points. But the consumption was difficult because, someone said, "Oh, you do a podcast. What is that?" And you're like, "Well, if you want to listen to my podcast, you have to sync your device." And, half the people you would say sync and you would just lose them immediately because their eyes would glaze over. So, in the early days, it really was this group of geeks and hardcore people that wanted to create media and hardcore audiences that wanted to listen to the content.
Let me ask you this, Todd. What did your wife say when you lost half of your readership, given the 2-year deadline that she?
I didn't tell her.
All right, so that answers that one. I hope she's not listening. I'm curious. What did you do your first show on? That's the first part of the question, and then the second part, Todd, if I can, is: did you draw any inspiration from other presenters in other channels? I'm thinking particularly broadcast, radio, TV. As this is what I'm going to style myself on.
Yeah. So the show that I started with, I still do today. It's called Geek News Central. It's at geeknewscentral.com. I'm 1,500 plus episodes in. Same sponsor since June of 2005. Wow. There's a story in that in itself. It really, I bought some books that were radio broadcast books, how to be a better presenter. I don't think I ever read more than 3 pages of them. They're here somewhere in this studio. There's a bookshelf somewhere with them on. But it's just like it is today. There was no rules. We did whatever we wanted. Now, the first 2 episodes no longer exist because I had AC/DC Back in Black intermixed in the show. And I got to episode 3 before I figured out, even then, it was illegal to have mainstream media in there. So I just deleted those 2 episodes. Those are gone. But what I really did was I found from my audience the battle rhythm of the show. And I started out with an outline for how the show would be produced every time. And there would have a segment. And then I would run with that for a month or 2, and then I would tweak something. And if the audience reacted negatively and got email, and audiences were emailing heavily in those early days, being engaged. So they were quick to tell you when they didn't like something. I remember I spent a lot of money on a brand new intro. I played that intro once because I got like 800 emails telling me to can that new intro. It was horrible. So we made adjustments as time went on, and the show was about 1 hour and 10 minutes. And then it reverted back to today where it's about 50.
It's interesting that you got so much feedback. Is that because the genre, as it were, was very new and people were engaged with the way you were presenting it, or just the overall newness of it, that they wanted to tell you if they thought the opening intro was shite or whatever?
My engagement with my audience has always been good. The last few years, maybe not as heavy, but I always prompt the audience. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Am I wrong? And believe it or not, I had people listen to my show that hated some of my opinions, and there's a guy named Sal out in New York. I wish he'd come back and listen to the show again. He was great for the show because he would come in and get an email, and I would read that on the show, and then we would have a debate. I would have a debate over his email, and then more people would email. So it was very dynamic, very fun. But it really boils down to one thing. My philosophy from the beginning in doing the show, my first 10 minutes of the show is not about tech. It's about me, what's going on and what I'm doing and what's up, and, how to support the show, and what's going on with the kids, and, all these things. And then the show happened. So for me, my audience, when I was living in Hawaii for so long, I lived there for 25 years, I basically was using the mantra that these listeners, and it's still, they're my family, they're my ohana. Ohana is a big, strong word in Hawaii. It means, you're encompassing family. So they're still my family of listeners, even though I don't live in Hawaii anymore. And so they are part of the value for value in providing information back to me. But I made them part of the show from day one.
That's interesting, though, because that is very, in some respects, akin to radio. And I'm thinking my own experience here of UK breakfast radio is very personality based. You get a lot of talk from the listeners, first of all, talking about their day and how are you, and then they get into the thrust of the show. Did you see it as being modelled on that kind of format from radio, or was it just still the Wild West for you?
It was pretty much the Wild West because, quite frankly, radio at the time was the enemy because Adam Curry has this saying about $50,000 worth of airplanes strapped to my butt and such. And it's basically, we were trying to break new ground here. And we were trying, and radio's starting to figure this out already, that, we are the way ahead for them. But I think that because there was no rules, because we didn't have to take breaks, because we could do the format that we wanted and still can, the medium just grew up differently, a bunch of rebels. And the community is not so much a bunch of rebels anymore, but believe me, we are all rebels because distribution in 2004, 2005, 2006 was controlled. Who controlled distribution? Newspapers, Microsoft, Yahoo, and a handful of people can control distribution of any content. Cable TV. I was naive. I went to a cable. It was as soon as over-the-top TV started coming, little Roku boxes were starting to come on the scene in the very, very early years. I went to this conference and I asked this executive, I said, what does it take for me to get on channel 482 of your cable system? He said, 10 years and $10 million. And smugly saying that, looking down upon me, upon his, nose down. And I walked out of there saying, screw you. I don't need you. I already have distribution and you can't stop it. Boy, oh boy, have they eaten crow since then. That's what it's about. There's no restrictions in distribution. They can't, even if you get siloed, let's say you say something you shouldn't say, and Apple takes you off the Apple podcast listing today. You have an RSS feed that's still your radio transmitter. People can still subscribe to that feed. You cannot be taken down. Now, do I agree with some of the content that Apple's taken off the air? No. But that person has a right to be able to continue to say what they want to say with the consequences that comes with it. And that's the beauty about this thing. It gives a voice to everyone. And what's really exciting is to see the diversity in voices that come into podcasting over the past 10 years. Because in the early days, it wasn't diverse at all.
Todd, what's one of the most important historical details that you think new podcasters should understand and why?
Oh, that we have no gatekeepers. And a lot of people don't realize the beauty in that. Now, is YouTube a gatekeeper? Yeah, I think so, because YouTube can take your content offline. They can demonetize you. They can take your content off if they don't agree with something you've said. We always talk about shadow banning. And I'm here to tell you that not only do conservatives get shadow banned, but liberals do as well. Those that are on the far ends of the spectrums get on mainstream websites like Facebook and all these other places. They do get marginalized. So one of the biggest things I heard coming out of an event just a couple of years ago at DragonCon, it was a diversity group. They said, we can get our voice out in the way we want to, and it can't be silenced. And I think that's the key here is podcasting is, as long as you control your RSS feed on your own .com, no one can shut you down unless you get your domain taken away. That's huge. It's huge. It's up to you to market your show and get it out there. But the Facebooks of the world can't say, oh, that's against community guidelines. And 99% of podcasters will never run up against this. But this is something key to remember. This is an open space. As long as the RSS stays open and no one tries to come in and mess with that. Every once in a while you hear someone talking about, well, we need to change RSS. my hair stand on the back of my neck because I'm like, what's your agenda? What's your plan? And for me, I'm a staunch defender of the openness of podcasting because it allows independent podcast creators like me and you to be able to do what we do and not have to ask anyone permission to sign a contract. Now, Spotify can kick us off, but we still, and I'm saying they're going to, I'm just using these examples.
You referred to the diversity of voices in podcasting, which I would agree with, and certainly, at least on the creation side. How diverse is leadership in podcast, and how fast do you think that might be changing?
I can speak for my team. We've worked really, really hard at having diversity within the overall company team, and I think that over time it will, and it should. We should see women and people of color being brought into leadership roles in all the companies, including mine. So I think it's something that and the whole, podcasting is not the only segment that's suffering from this. So I think we all have to cognitively work at, making it a diverse group. Because I'll be honest with you, I got lucky. I didn't really kind of, in the early days of building the company, this wasn't something I was fully cognizant aware of. And then I just picked the best candidates, and luckily I got this great diverse group, women, men, people, the whole scheme of things. And now it's like, we're lucky we got that built out of a team. So I think companies have to be cognizant of it as they're growing. We always want the best candidate, but we always have to think about, making opportunities available, not just for creators, but as you said, for leadership.
How international is the industry at this moment in time? I mean, I think diversity looks different in different countries. I live in a different country than where I grew up. So, I know that diversity means something different here. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, if we look at just how the flow of the media has went, how podcasting has went, obviously Canada, United States, UK led the pack. Germany, Spain, they came in a little bit late. Actually, Germany was pretty early. Now we're seeing huge growth in Brazil. Starting to see, of course, Asia has always kind of been there, but now we're seeing in India a huge, huge, huge rise of podcasters out of India. The world has slowly adopted podcasting in some countries, in some regions, and specifically in the Middle East. Diversity, forget it. There is no diversity in the Middle East. It's a man's world in most cases in many countries in the Middle East. Now, in regards to India and other countries like that, I see good diversity already in content and some in leadership as well. So, I guess it depends on how you want to look at this, but I think as a content standpoint, we're seeing globally growth because Australia has been big for years. It won't be too long before all the major media platforms throughout the entire world support podcasts one way or the other. Then we're going to start seeing the second tier, apps that's focus on, let's just, use a term, basket weaving. If you have a basket weaving app, you're probably going to have 10 podcasts that are about basket weaving associated with that app. So what we'll see then is a little more targeting of content that'll be on different apps. But for now, Samsung joining the party here is huge because it brings podcasting to Android devices worldwide, and Android outpaces Apple. I mean, the iPhone, the Apple products by, 3 or 4 times globally. So for me, that's exciting to get a foot in the door with Samsung and their reach. And sometime in the future, they'll probably have a podcast app dedicated that loads as part of the OEM build. That was a big key to Apple Podcasts too, was they loaded Apple Podcasts onto the iPhone default. You didn't have to add it as an app. That was huge. That was a big inflection point, big jump in consumption. So I think growth opportunities globally are really unlimited at this point. And then we're going to get to the point where we're just going to have to, where podcast becomes a word where, no one even blinks at it.
Tell us if you can, Todd. I mean, you talked about your engaged audience, and you've been talking really interestingly about the podcasting world. But what kind of reaction did you get from the mainstream media back in those kind of early days to what you were doing? Were you largely ignored, or were you grudgingly respected, or was it something else?
Well, it's an interesting story because I've got a good story on that. So a good friend of mine, his name was Andy McCaskey. He used to do a show called the Slashdot Review. It was basically a daily show on Slashdot, but was hot on Slashdot. And him and I went to Consumer Electronics Show in 2005 and walked around with a microphone and did interviews. We were credentialed. We were able to get press passes. And they said, this is a visual medium. We need to come back next year with cameras. And we did. We came back next year with cameras, walked around, did a couple hundred interviews, put those out as separate bonus materials for each of our shows. And then I don't exactly, I have to look at the history. I've got a history written down somewhere, but at some point streaming started to be a thing. And we thought, well, why not do a live stream from the Consumer Electronics Show? And we're getting, again, making connections. We were going to over the MSNBC booth. We were going to the BBC booth. We were going to all these, meeting all these people because we wanted to see what the big boys were doing and made friends. And it was the year of the Olympics in Vancouver. So whatever year that was. Tom Brokaw had, as he was doing his nightly news they had a multi-million-dollar set at CES, but the rest of the day just sat there empty. And I asked one of the staff people, or one of my team members did, maybe Jeffrey or somebody asked, can we use that studio for live streaming when no one else is using it? And said, well, you can't use the unionized camera people or anything like that. So we basically set up our own little deal. And here's the thing. We were supposed to go on at a certain time, and some gal was doing a 60-second take on something. Took her an hour and a half to do a 60-second commercial. The whole team was there. You could see the frustration on everybody's eyes. We rushed in, set up a camera, got a laptop on the ground with a little MiFi, got everything set up. And I had 13 guests lined up, and I had an hour to run them through. And we just went bam, 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 bam. Now, interestingly enough, the MSNBC people are looking at the laptop because we're on Ustream, and they're looking at the user count. And we're 35,000, 45,000, 55,000, 105,000 people on the live stream. And they haven't been able to break 1,000 or 2,000 on their live stream. And we got done. And although we couldn't use the camera operators are still in their chair and they're applauding us as we leave. And that opened the door for new ideas and new ways to do the show. So we were back the following year, did another deal with MSNBC where then they stopped coming to the show. I approached the Consumer Electronics Association. I said, hey, we'd like a live streaming booth. I need a 10 by 20. They put me in the nosebleed in the back of South Hall. I mean, an absolute worst place. So it'd take you 45 minutes to get to the booth, but yet we interviewed 200 people in 4.5 days and had over 70 million views of that content. So what we did is we paid our dues and broke ground, and we're able to use that as evidence to get into shows like NAB and to get into all these big trade show events by saying, here's our model, here's how we work. And, we were laughed at for having the small camera while the big guys were carrying the big camera and 5 people to carry the gear around. We're going around with the small camera. And it's one of those things like the will to do it. We spent money. I was spending $40,000 to go to the Consumer Electronics Show and bring 20 people in, and everything that went along with it was not cheap, but we had sponsors and we made money and it worked. We also realized as podcasters, we just couldn't do the podcast. And I tell podcasters this all the time. You just can't do a show. You got to do a blog. You got to go to events. You got to meet people. You got to write a book. You got, all these things you have to do to build a show.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say, Todd, that perhaps the evolution of podcasting would have been very different, or may even not have happened or progressed at all if it hadn't been pioneered by the tech community and some of the high-profile figures in the tech community, especially on Silicon Valley and the things that you were doing? Would it have been a different thing entirely, do you think?
Well, I was a nobody according to Silicon Valley. I went to try to get money and they told me I was too old. So I was, remember I was in the Navy at the time. So I was just this dude, that did a tech show. So I really was nobody. I started this company. And matter of fact, go to New York to try to get advertising dollars. And I was wearing a, $99 JCPenney suit. And, the lady that drugged me out of the first office told me never come back to my office again and present for my people in that kind of a suit. So I thought, oh my God, here I got to have a Brooks Brothers to come in and talk to you. So literally, I mean, I'm not kidding you. She grabbed my jacket and she was probably wearing an $800 dress. And I'm there on, max my credit card out. I think that the bottom line is that there was a handful of rebels, Adam Curry having the vision and Dave Weiner to have the vision to get this off the ground. And then a whole bunch of people worked really, really hard to make this medium work. We were doing advertising in the early days, brought hosting on later. Libsyn was doing hosting. It was just an evolution and we ground. I wanted to add people, but I didn't want to go get money because I knew once the VCs got the hook in me, I'd be done. I had 3 years on the clock before they would say, okay, we're going to shut the pipe off. So for us, it was build as we could and work through. Now there's, I got 30 competitors now. And, do I wish I had 30 competitors? No, but it's just the nature of the space. The space has grown up and big money's come into it. But at the same time, there was no one, there was some big, there were some people like Adam Carolla and Scoble and a number of other folks that were doing podcasts that were pretty high profile, but they were just creating content. They weren't leading the business charge to make the space happen.
This is a question for Adam Curry, I guess, but how did he get money? I mean, he had that Headbangers Ball thing on his CV. So
yeah, well, Adam hooked up with a guy named Ron Bloom, and he was a business partner, and Ron could sell sell water at the edge of Lake Michigan. I mean, really, the guy, you want someone to raise some money, he's the dude. And Adam has told that story many times, but they formed a company called Mevio and it had a good vision, but it just, the open nature podcasting, they tried to lock people in and, lots of, monetization issues. And, it just was too early. If he'd have been 10 years later, it would have been highly successful. He might be the current Spotify. But I think that many of the ideas even we had were too early. I built a system to do premium podcasting 10 years ago, and we shelved it because no one wanted to do it. So there was a lot of stuff that we were trying to do in the early days that were just, just the pure vision. And I keep going back to it. Yeah, we could blog. Yep, we could put audio on our web pages. Yep, we could put video on. This is before YouTube. This is before Twitter. This is before Facebook. This is MySpace time. The simple fact that I could take this content that I had created and walk out the front door with a device, whether it be an iRiver with 8 episodes on it or an iPod, that was something. Because that was the era of putting a cassette deck adapter, hooking it to some sort of odd, because there wasn't even CD players in many cars at that point. So I think that the ability to take the content with you was a big part of this and having freedom from being force-fed stuff from the mainstream media. It was refreshing. I think that had as much to do with it as anything.
Is there a technology or policy or consumer trend that you think that's sort of outside of podcasting right now that you think has the potential to greatly change podcasting soon?
I don't think so. A lot of people have said social audio is got the ability. I think it's a little different. It's harder to control the message in platforms like Clubhouse. I think that for me, Clubhouse is a tool. It's another tool to build audience. It's another tool to build engagement. If you do it right and control and have good audio quality, that's the biggest challenge we've had playing around with Clubhouse and tools like that, is if you employ it correctly, it can be great. Now, for conversations, for people just talking and sharing their ideas, Clubhouse is amazing. But for podcast creation, I think there's a mix of potential there. You look at some stuff that Mark Cuban's doing. That's kind of exciting. But again, it's around the social audio deal. But nothing is going to beat me as far as my content goes and building an audience than having my own website, creating my own episodes, writing titles that are Google friendly, doing the SEO game, getting the content out there, making the sponsor happy. For me, then maybe it's old school, but I experiment with the new stuff. But I think social audio has been the thing. Everyone thinks, oh, that's going to disrupt podcasting. I think it's early days because Clubhouse launched at a great time. We're still locked down. Everyone had no lives. There's had no football games, no basketball, no soccer, no gymnastics, no after school events, no PTA, all that stuff that is now coming back on. And people are going to lose those 3 or 4 extra hours that they've had every day for the past year and a half by real life coming back in play. And are they going to be able to spend 3 hours in Clubhouse? Is it going to fit? I don't think so, personally.
You've talked a lot on the new media show lately about commitment, and that's commitment on both the creator and the listener sides of the changes that Apple is making to their podcast app. Do you think that will make it less attractive to enter podcasting for, beginners or people like us who are independent? And the division between free and premium, or whatever you want to call it, is that going to be confusing to listeners, do you think?
Not if you are telling your audience what's going on and educate them. I think it's a duty of a podcaster to educate their audience of what's going on in the podcasting space, even a little bit. But if you look at the space as a whole, I think the podcast index and the effort with RSS 2.0 going on over there, and we could talk a whole hour on that, but I don't want to get into that deeply, is I think they're tracking like 3.7 million podcasts globally, yet only about 400,000 podcasts have created a new episode in the last 30 days. If you Google how many blogs there are, there's several, 70 million blogs or something like that. How many YouTubers there are. There is no problem being in the podcasting space and being able to build an audience and grow a show. Okay, I say that lightly, but it's work. There's this saying in Hawaii, so let's go grind. Grind means let's go to lunch. Let's have some grinds. For me, and today, podcasting is about grinding. It's about creating content, being consistent, doing superior content. In fact, our newsletter today, nothing substitutes sustained superior content on a consistent basis. Nothing beats that. You keep doing that day, week after week after week, and do the other things you need to build a show, then your podcast is going to be a success. Unless you're an Oprah, you're not going to get to 1 million listeners overnight. It's going to take you time to get 1,000. But when you get to 1,000, it's easier to get from 1,000 to 10, and it's a lot easier to get from 10 to 100. The key is to get to 1,000, and then you have multiplicity of scale. So from a content, and I don't know if I've answered your entire question here, but from a content creator standpoint, there's no better time than be a podcaster right now, because more than 75% of the shows that start today will not be here in 2 years. So all you got to do is get to 2 years. I often say you just got to get to episode 25.
We can do
it. I think what's a bit an interesting development, and I'd like to get your perspective on it if we can, Todd. I mean, it's almost any kind of feature series in the mainstream media, or a film or an album, often has an accompanying podcast with it.
Bravo. Yeah.
You've kind of answered your question already. I just wonder if that's, because of when you think of the dynamic and heavily funded forces behind so much of the bigger mainstream, like the film industry and the music industry and stuff like that, is that a land grab, or is that, as you say, bravo, all play to them, just go for it?
What it is Larry King, God rest his soul, talked about his podcast on every night he signed off at CNN. Now, he's been off CNN for years, and he left CNN in not so great terms. But he helped grow the industry. Serial helped grow the industry. Yeah. Adam Carolla helped grow the industry. BBC helps grow the industry, because guess what? Podcast. People say, oh, what is a podcast? And they go out and they subscribe to 5, 6, 7 shows. They're not all going to be shows that are about a television or about a series. And you're going to look for content that interests you, and you're going to find shows like mine. And you might listen. Matter of fact, a long run show like me, I've had listeners come and go, because they get sick of listening to you. They go listen to something else. So when you add the premium piece to this, which I probably was part of the question I didn't answer was every content creator now, if they have enough of an audience, has the potential to add a new revenue stream by adding a supplementary content in Apple Podcasts and make it a premium, and soon Spotify and all the others will follow. Advertisers have not welcomed to the fact that small shows have higher engagement rates. They're not going to advertise them anytime soon. They're still looking for shows with 10,000 episodes or more. And believe me, I pounded my head against concrete for 15 years trying to make this happen for smaller podcasters. And it's, I could cuss. It's very frustrating.
You can cuss.
Okay. It's very frustrating to me because what we have to do is we have to give opportunities to podcasters at all levels to make money. So that, guess what? Their wife or partner or significant other don't have their finger in their chest saying, why are you spending 3 hours a week creating this podcast? You could be spending with me or the kids or whatever. So if we can put enough money in independent podcasters' pockets where they can make a car payment, take someone out to dinner, whatever it may be, whatever that level is, it'll be better for the space. So anytime there's an opportunity for a podcaster to make some money, if he has the right talents and the right content, I think it's a good thing. Most small podcasts that are earning $50,000 or more annually, and I'm talking of small shows, they're doing it through their businesses, promotion, consulting. They have built, maybe they've added podcasting as part of their ecosphere. There's still more than 50% of podcasters that don't care to ever make a dime. They just hang out with their girlfriend or they're drinking a beer and they're just creating some content and having fun. And the best part about this is there's room for everybody. So more mainstream people that come on and do premium shows or do something based upon a series, man, it just builds momentum for the space and growth.
You speak very optimistically about almost everything. So I'm going to be the journalist here and just ask you, what haven't you liked about the development or the evolution of podcasting in the 17 years? What's kind of pissed you off over the last 17 years then?
Being Spotify's tech support. And, that was one thing, because then what did they do? They went, they built all this hype. They built, everyone wanted to be on the platform. And then they bought a podcasting platform. They'd used all of us that were competing against each other to build all the people in. Then they bought someone to compete with us. So I guess that's what big companies do. And we're big enough boys, and it hasn't hurt us. And they purchased Anchor, and the 1 million dead shows that are over there on Anchor are a testament to how well they're doing. But I'm just a little jab there. But and again, but it's also at the same point, we've had a lot of people that have started their shows on Anchor, then graduated into growing their shows up and getting their own .com and building their own brand and realizing that it was a great starter site to start their show.
Yeah. There's lots of, in inverted commas, celebrity podcasts now.
Celebrity doesn't mean guarantee of audience.
Or quality. I think that's
Right.
the point I was going to make. I mean, I don't know. I would feel quite frustrated that it has almost become a little bit of a, who can shout the loudest and who's got the next big kind of sponsorship deal and things like that. That must be slightly disappointing, is it?
I know it's comical at times. I remember an advertiser coming to me and saying, we want to spend this amount of money with this show. And I said, not a good fit. And I said, well, it's this name, we want him. I'm like, okay. We put the deal together. And I said, before we execute this deal, I'm going to send you a piece of paper. And I sent a piece of paper that said, under my advisement, this campaign will do horribly. I am not liable for any make goods. I'm not giving you any credit. I'm advising you not to run against this on this campaign. And they signed it. They spent their $20,000 and got 0 referrals. And they came back to me and asked for make goods. And I said, see this piece of paper you signed? I told you that it was not a good fit and this was not going to work. And I got my 20 grand and the person got his commission. So being a celebrity doesn't always mean people are going to buy stuff or there's going to be, I think the Spotify buy of the biggest show on podcasting was probably a brilliant move. We'll see how the audience does over the years. people are already bootlegging that content and putting it out as a podcast, so they can still go around the main venue to get that show. The Podcast One, they worked with a lot of celebrities over the years. I've known Norm and his team. Of course, Norm is now, I think, stepped away from the podcasting space. They really focused on celebrities over the years. And of course, Rob Greenlee worked over there for a while as well. He's my co-host of the New Media Show. And Rob can't say, because he's probably still under NDA, probably under NDA for life, but there was shows over there that had huge celebrities that were, bomb, because I don't think a lot of those folks are used to being genuine.
Interesting.
How do you discover new podcasts, Todd? I mean, what are your criteria? How do you recommend things or accept recommendations?
I'm a glutton for punishment. I listen to 100 new shows every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And I have almost 20 binders of notes on different shows.
Really?
What's your quality filter then?
I give a show 5 minutes to get me kind of like, is this going to be interesting? Is this going to be a bore? I would probably rate my show badly, my personal show, because I don't get to the point, right? Do as I say, not as I do. One of those things.
Right. Okay.
It's really about energy. It's really about being up to do a show. I tell people, if you're not up to do a show, don't do the show. I've told my audience, if I'm not feeling good, I'm not doing a show. If it takes jumping jacks or drinking a Red Bull before you do an interview, then that's what you got to do. You got to have the energy up. And when you've had everything you've had to say, stop. Don't keep talking for the sake of talking. I have a handful of core shows I listen to. My most favorite is obviously the No Agenda Show. I listen to Adam Curry and his partner there do their show. They have the best model for user contribution system in the entire world. They have an amazing audience. I'm jealous of the audience they have, but there's lots of other good podcasts out there that have different formats.
Do you have a particular genre that you like? I mean, we've interviewed people that host music podcasts. We've done a lot on true crime. They seem to be very popular with our listeners. We've done culture ones. We've done mental health ones. I mean, do you have one that you naturally gravitate towards? I'm thinking maybe a non-techie one, because that's kind of the world that you've come from.
I've interviewed a lot of people that do self-help and do recovery stories, some faith-based stuff too. I've done interviews on. A lot of times I'm exposed to shows based on doing this, what you guys are doing to me. So I think that some of the podcasts that I've listened to where people have recovered from something, injury or health or a cancer or whatever, those to me are pretty motivational type of show stories I like to listen to. You hear about the diversity and then what they've overcome. At the same time, I'm a big tech fan. I don't listen to music podcasts. I'm not a sports guy, so I don't listen to sports shows. Listen to science shows. True crime, boy, I think the ladies have that one locked up. That genre, oh my God. You want to talk about super fans. There's no other genre that has bigger super fans than true crime right now. They've got it locked down.
Todd, I have 2 last questions. If you had to pass the honor of the next MetaPod podcasting pioneer interview that you're doing now to someone else, who would it be? And might it be a woman?
First thing that comes up to mind is the She Podcast leaders, Elsie and that team.
Yep.
They've done remarkable things. Women are outpacing men significantly in bringing on new shows. So they've been not largely, but they've been very, very, well, maybe largely, very influential in making that happen. So, there's a number of women that are in the trenches every day in podcasts. Elsie's been around a long time in the space and has a unique perspective. Her and Jessica both. So I think they're good candidates for, someone you would want to talk to.
Okay. One last question, and this is a bit of a silly one. And I listened to some of the funny phrases that you use on the New Media Show. And one of my favorite, and I'm just going to ask you if you can say it, is winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Yeah, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Yeah, I don't know why that it's one of those phrases that pays.
Thank you so much, Todd, for talking to us here on MetaPod. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and best of luck with your show.
Thank you. thanks to Todd for making time for us back in June. That's much appreciated.
We've got more of these podcast pioneers interviews lined up this year, so stay tuned. And of course, any pioneers that listeners want to recommend, you can get in touch with us via the contact page on the website.
As demonstrated with our recent episode with the guys from Smart Enough to Know Better, MetaPod is getting pretty good at scheduling time zones, eh?
Indeed we are, and we're ready for more shows across the globe. So also send us your recommendations for our usual episodes too.
So, coming soon to MetaPod listeners, we have more music from the duo behind Permanent Record Podcast, more science from Unexplainable, and, well, a show devoted to an entirely new genre of podcasts, candles.
That's right, you heard it here first on MetaPod. We're going behind, and I've got to say this with a straight voice, right? We're going behind the scenes of the hot and waxy world of candles with Selena Kopic of the 2 Wick Minimum podcast.
All right, let's go. Put your incense away and grab your Yankee candles. You might want to wear your flame-resistant outfits for this one, people.
So if you like MetaPod, please follow the show where you prefer to listen to your podcasts. It helps others to find us. Even better, if you can leave us a rating or a review where you listen, that would be most splendid. And thank you very much.
Also, you can find more info about all of our episodes online at metapodshow.com. Thanks so much for listening, and that's all for now.
And we'll see you next time. Thanks again.
Thank you.